All right, let's dive right into a huge thought experiment, but one that's actually grounded in some very real and very current trends. What if the Roman Empire, or, something a lot like it, made a comeback in our 21st century world? But before we can even get to that, we have to ask an even bigger question. What if the systems we all count on, global finance, international borders, political stability, what if they all just shattered? Not in 10 years, but like tomorrow. Because that is exactly where our scenario kicks off. So picture this. The year is 2026. A whole series of crises that have been quietly brewing for decades all suddenly boil over at the exact same time. This isn't just one bad thing happening. It's a perfect storm that pushes the entire modern world right to the edge. And it happens incredibly fast. First, a devastating global recession starts in China. At the exact same moment, Europe's debt crisis, which has been simmering for years, just explodes. And then, the final blow. A massive wave of 5 million climate refugees pushes north. The system just can't take it. Borders slam shut, and that whole European dream of free movement, it vanishes, literally overnight. It's total chaos. So you have to ask, how did we get here? Right? A collapse this big doesn't just happen out of nowhere. The truth is, the cracks in the foundation had been showing for 30 years, from about 1996 all the way to 2026, building up to this exact moment. Well, for decades, that old post-Cold War idea that liberal democracy would just keep expanding, it started to fall apart. Brexit was a huge shock, right? It proved that European unity wasn't a sure thing. Nationalist movements started gaining real power all across the continent. And meanwhile, you look over at authoritarian countries like Russia and China, and they started to look, well, pretty effective to a lot of people. For 15 years straight, democracy was actually in retreat around the world. Trust in the old way of doing things was just evaporating. And behind all that political anger, there was this incredible economic desperation. I mean, just look at these numbers. In the 2010s, youth unemployment in Southern Europe was a complete catastrophe. Over 40% in Spain, Greece, and Italy. That's not just a statistic, That's an entire lost generation of young people with absolutely no stake in the system. It's the perfect fertile ground for some truly radical ideas to take root. And at the very same time, you had this new class of super wealthy tech billionaires emerge, people with power that could rival whole countries. And a lot of them started to openly question if democracy was even the best way to run things anymore. I mean, when someone like Peter Thiel comes right out and says something like this, it's a huge signal of a major shift in thinking. The belief among some of the world's most powerful people that maybe a more efficient system was needed. So, by early 2027, the old world is basically in flames. And out of that chaos in Italy, a radical solution emerges. A movement calling itself Rinascita Romana, or Roman Renaissance, steps right into that power vacuum. And their promise? To bring back order using a very bold and very ancient blueprint. And they don't waste any time. They move with unbelievable speed. The military calls it a protective intervention. They just suspend the old, broken constitution. A new Roman-style government is put in place. They completely default on all their old debt and launch a brand new stable digital currency. And here's the kicker, they create a new military, and they tie full citizenship and all its benefits directly to service. It is a complete teardown and rebuild of the entire state. Now, here's the shocking part. It actually works. Order is restored, the economy stabilizes, and this success story becomes like a powerful magnet for other struggling nations. Greece, which is facing its own nightmare, asks to join. The Mediterranean parts of Spain, feeling totally cut off from their own government, vote to join up too. The new Rome starts to grow. Okay, so what does this new state, which now calls itself Nova Roma, actually look like? How does it run day to day? What does it even mean to be a citizen there? This is where their model gets really interesting, because it's this wild mix of ancient Roman ideas and super modern technology. So here's the basic structure. It's what they call a mixed government. You've got a Senate made up of 300 appointed experts, we're talking scientists, generals, engineers, who are there for life to provide long-term strategy. Then you have an elected tribune assembly to represent what the citizens actually want. And leading it all is a single consul, an executive, elected by both of those groups for a 7-year term. The whole idea is to get a perfect balance between expert knowledge and popular will. And when you put it side by side with what came before, the contrast is just stark. On one side, you have the messy party politics of the old liberal democracies, and on the other, you have Nova Roma's vision, a technocracy where citizenship isn't something you're born with, it's something you earn through service. And get this, their big idea for transparency is to run the entire government on a blockchain, creating a level of public oversight that is, at least in theory, completely total. So let's pull back from the story for a second. What does this whole thought experiment really tell us? This idea of a new Rome, it's like a mirror, right? It reflects the anxieties, the weak spots, and maybe even some of the hidden desires of our own world, right now. And it forces us to ask some really uncomfortable questions. I mean, we usually think of authoritarianism as being corrupt and inefficient, but what if new technologies like AI and blockchain could create a version that's brutally efficient and totally transparent? And if that happened, could it even be seen as a good thing, as benevolent by the people living in it? Which brings us to that timeless dilemma. When you're faced with economic collapse, out-of-control borders, and political chaos, what are people willing to give up to get security and stability back? This whole scenario suggests that the price people are willing to pay might be a lot higher than any of us would like to admit. And one final thought. In a world that feels so fragmented, could a totally new kind of identity pop up? One that's not based on where your parents were from or your ethnic background, but on a shared commitment to a set of ideas, a civilization that you earn your way into through service. Could that actually be a more powerful way to unite people? Look, whether this vision of a new Rome is a nightmare dystopia we should fear, or some kind of model to think about, it forces us to look at the deep cracks in our own world. The material we're drawing from ends on this really powerful, lingering thought. The conditions that created the first Rome are happening again. The eagles, in some way, shape, or form, might just fly again. The only real question is, will we be ready?
Okay, I want you to close your eyes for a second. Picture a map of the Mediterranean, but not the map you saw in school. Picture it, say, in the year 2056. The borders look, well, they look wrong. Or maybe, if you know your history, they look incredibly old. Italy, Greece, southern Spain, parts of North Africa, they're not different colors anymore. They're all one block. You've got solar panels blanketing the Sahara, brand new marble facades being 3D printed in Rome, and the government. Well, it's not a democracy as we'd understand. It's a republic, yeah, technically. But it's one run by a combination of blockchain smart contracts and a literal Senate.
It sounds like the setup for a cyberpunk novel or, some kind of high-concept alternate history series.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. And this is the reason we're talking about it today. The source material we're looking at isn't a fantasy novel. It's presented as a geopolitical analysis, a thought experiment. It's titled, What If the Roman Empire Came Back Today? And the author isn't playing around with time travel or magic. Not at all. They're treating this return of Rome as a logical, almost inevitable conclusion to the trends we're living through right now.
And that's what makes this document so unsettling and so gripping. It frames the return of Rome not as some kind of historical reenactment, but as a solution. It argues that the convergence of wealth inequality, migration crises, and all this advanced technology is creating a vacuum. And that vacuum is shaped perfectly for a Nova Roma, a new Rome, to step in and fill it.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack that thought experiment. We're going to look at how modern tech AI, blockchain surveillance could actually rehabilitate ancient authoritarianism. We're going to ask, could a Nova Roma actually solve the problems the 21st century can't seem to fix? And, would we be willing to pay the price for it?
To get there, to understand the destination, we have to look at the map the source draws for us. It starts with what it calls the 30-year prelude. That runs from roughly 1996 to 2026. This is the era where the foundation for a new empire gets laid almost by accident.
Right. And it starts by taking a sledgehammer to that whole end of history idea. You remember that 90s optimism? The wall falls, democracy wins, everything's going to be great forever.
Precisely. The source argues that whole narrative just collapsed. It points to the Yugoslav wars, to Brexit, to the polarization of the European Union as, proof that the consensus was eroding. But specifically, it highlights the growing divide between the north and the south of Europe. You had Germany and the north imposing austerity, while the south, Greece, Italy, felt humiliated. The source argues this started to mirror that ancient distinction between the civilized center and the barbaric periphery, or at least the exploiter and the exploited.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The source draws this direct parallel between our current economy and the late Roman Republic. It talks about the new patricians.
Yes. This is a crucial comparison. In the late Roman Republic, you had individuals, figures like Crassus or Pompey, whose personal wealth literally rivaled the state's. Today, the source points to tech billionaires. We're talking about figures like Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg. The analysis here isn't just, oh, rich people exist. It's structural. These individuals control infrastructure.
They do. They control space exploration, global communications,
payment systems, things that have traditionally been functions of the state.
It's true. I mean, if you think about it, a decision made in a boardroom in Silicon Valley can affect more people than most laws passed in national parliaments. A billionaire decides to turn off the satellites, and a war changes course. And the source calls this neo-feudalism.
It creates a class dynamic that looks very, very Roman. You have this hollowing out of the middle class. Manufacturing jobs move, the gig economy takes over, and you get what sociologists call the precariat. The source compares this modern precariat to the Roman proletariat, the urban poor, a huge mass of people with no stability, dependent on these patron-client relationships just to get by.
So instead of a local lord, you have a digital platform you rely on for your gig work.
Exactly. You are totally dependent on the patron for your livelihood because the state can no longer guarantee your economic security.
So you got the angry mob, and you got the ultra-wealthy senators. The stage is set. But there's a cultural shift happening, too. The source mentions this weird obsession with Caesarism in the tech world.
It's a fascinating, if a little disturbing, trend. The source highlights things like the Bronze Age pervert book or the Silicon Valley obsession with Stoicism. There's this growing intellectual movement that views democratic processes as outdated legacy software. They look at the gridlock of modern parliaments, the inability to build high-speed rail or fix healthcare, and they think, wouldn't it be better if a CEO just ran the country? It's a total rejection of liberal democracy in favor of what they call Pax Romana peace through superior administration and overwhelming force.
And speaking of force, we can't ignore the military aspect. The source points out that we've basically privatized war.
The condottieri, groups like Blackwater, the Wagner Group. When the state loses its monopoly on violence and starts relying on private contractors, you're moving back to a world where armies are loyal to a paycheck or a commander. Not necessarily the Constitution. And that is exactly what happened just before the fall of the Roman Republic. The legions became loyal to their generals, not to Rome.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've got the ideology, the money, the soldiers, and the dissatisfaction. The powder keg is full. The source says the match is lit in late 2026. What happens?
It's a perfect storm. The source describes a scenario where Italy's debt to GDP hits a staggering 160%. The economy is in free fall. At the exact same time, climate collapse in the Sahel triggers a migration wave of 5 million people in a single year. The European Union's border arrangements just snap.
Total chaos. And in walks Rinascita Romana.
The Roman Renaissance? But, and this is key, it's not a violent coup in the traditional sense. It's not tanks rolling over the Constitution. It's a coalition of military veterans and tech entrepreneurs who stage a protective intervention in Italy in 2027. They don't say, we're taking over. They say, the current system has failed to protect you. We will. They act as receivers for a bankrupt state.
And they don't just impose martial law. They rewrite the Constitution. And this is the part that feels so strangely futuristic yet ancient. They replace the parliament with a mixed government.
This is straight out of classical political theory, Polybius specifically. They argue that pure democracy leads to mob rule, pure monarchy leads to tyranny. So you blend them. They set up a consul, that's the executive, a senate of appointed experts and elites, and a tribune assembly of elected representatives. It's designed to balance power, but not through universal democracy.
But, and this is the modern twist, they use technology to make it palatable. The source talks about blockchain-verified contracts to clean up corruption.
That's the Nova and Nova Ordo. They launch a new digital currency, the Solidus. And because every single transaction is on the blockchain, corruption becomes almost impossible. If a senator takes a bribe, everyone sees it on the ledger. If public funds are moved, it's visible. The source argues this radical transparency is how they win people over. People are willing to trade some freedom for a government that actually works and is mathematically proven, to be honest.
But there is a massive trade-off.
Yeah.
We have to talk about tiered citizenship. This part just blew my mind.
This is the most radical departure from modern Western values. In Nova Roma, citizenship is no longer a birthright. It is earned.
So just being born there makes you a resident.
Correct. Residents have basic legal protections, human rights, property rights, all that stuff. But if you want to vote, if you want the universal basic income, the UBI, you have to become a citizen.
Yeah.
And to become a citizen, you have to complete a term of civil or military service.
That is. See, distinctively Starship Troopers, isn't it? Service guarantees citizenship.
It is, but the source grounds it in Roman virtue ethics. The idea is that you only get a say in the state if you've demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice for it. It changes the relationship between the individual and the government from a rights-based model to a duty-based model. And the carrot is the UBI. If you want the financial security of the state, you have to serve the state first.
And apparently this model is popular, or at least it's successful, because Nova Roma starts expanding. It's not just Italy for long.
No. The stability is a magnet for its neighbors. Greece, crushed by debt, joins for relief. Southern Spain, Catalonia, and Andalusia, they break away from Madrid to join this new economic powerhouse. Southern France sets up special economic zones.
And they look south, too. Tunisia and Egypt become protectorates.
Which creates a Nova Roma confederation. They effectively turn the Mediterranean into a strictly managed internal lake. By controlling the North African coast, they control the migration routes, effectively solving the very crisis that birthed them. By 2030, the map has been completely redrawn.
So now we have this new superpower on the block. How does the rest of the world react? We're in the 2030s now.
This source describes a world split into a great power triangle. You have the American alliance, still trying to maintain the old liberal order. You have the Sino-Russian Eurasian Union, and now you have Nova Roma holding the center.
But it's not all peaceful trade deals. There's an antagonist.
Turkey. The source describes a revival of the Ottoman-Roman rivalry. It's almost poetic, isn't it? These two ancient empires facing off again over the same waters. There's a cold peace, but it heats up. In 2034, there's a skirmish over Cyprus and the Aegean Islands.
And how does Nova Roma survive that? They don't have nuclear weapons, do they? They're not the US or Russia.
No, the source implies they rely on economic and resource independence to survive without nukes. This is where the geography pays off. They use North African solar power massive arrays in the Sahara and Mediterranean water resources to achieve total energy independence. They don't need Russian gas. They don't need Middle Eastern oil. That makes them incredibly hard to leverage geopolitically. You can't really sanction a country that powers and feeds itself completely.
It's a fortress. A solar-powered, blockchain-run fortress. But what about inside the walls? You can't just impose pagan imagery on Italy and expect everyone to be cool with it.
That's a major source of internal tension the source identifies. You have a state using symbols of eagles and Latin, ruling over deeply Catholic and Muslim populations. I mean, the Pope is still in Rome, living in a state that uses imperial pagan aesthetics. It creates a lot of friction.
And surely people miss democracy. You can't just delete the idea of one person, one vote without some kind of pushback.
Absolutely not. The source details the democracy movements of the 2040s. People protest. They demand the direct election of the consul. And interestingly, the system adapts. It doesn't crush them entirely, it evolves. By the 2050s, they do get direct elections for the executive. It shows that even this authoritarian model has to bargain with its people. It suggests that Nova Roma isn't a totalitarian monolith, but a living political organism.
So let's fast forward to the end of the timeline. It's 2056. The sun is setting on the Mediterranean. What is life actually like for a citizen of Nova Roma?
The economic model is described as market republicanism, so it's a mix of state strategy and market capitalism. But because of the AI and automation and all that solar energy, they've reached kind of post-scarcity level for citizens.
The UBI lets people focus on other things, right?
Yes. The source paints a picture of citizens focusing on civic virtue, arts, philosophy. It's an idealized version of the leisure class, but democratized to those who served. It's a society that has decided the purpose of life isn't just GDP growth, but something vaguely grander.
And they've cleaned up the place, literally.
Environmental restoration is a huge part of their legitimacy. If you're going to claim to be the guardians of civilization, you have to protect the land. They clean the Mediterranean of plastic. They use genetic engineering to reforest parts of the desert. It's a clean empire.
It's a powerful propaganda tool. Democracy gave you pollution and gridlock. We gave you clean seas and free time. And they're looking up too. The force mentions Roman eagles on Mars.
That expansionist drive, the need to conquer, it gets channeled into space colonization instead of just terrestrial war. It's a smart way to keep a militaristic society from eating itself. You give the soldiers and the engineers a frontier that doesn't involve invading France.
And there's also a resolution to the whole Turkey conflict.
Yes, in 2055, a treaty brings Turkey in as a semi-autonomous region. It effectively unifies the entire Mediterranean basin under one economic umbrella.
Which brings us to a really profound point the source makes about identity. By 2056, what does it even mean to be Roman?
This is the most optimistic part of the document, I think. It argues that Roman becomes a purely civic identity, not an ethnic one. You can have a Tunisian senator, a Spanish consul, or a Buddhist general. As long as they serve the state and uphold the culture, they're Roman. It completely transcends race and blood.
It's seductive, isn't it? I mean, reading this, you find yourself nodding along. Yeah, clean oceans, no corruption, a sense of purpose, unity. And then you remember, oh, right, I have to serve in the military to vote, and a few rich elites run the Senate.
That is the trap. The source concludes with a verdict. Nova Roma succeeds, it brings order, it brings prosperity, it heals the environment. But the cost is liberal freedom. It creates a rigid class system. It replaces equality with hierarchy.
It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. The source calls it the fundamental question.
Can modern technology rehabilitate ancient governance? We tend to think of history as this straight line, always moving toward more democracy, more freedom. This thought experiment suggests that history might actually be circular, that when chaos gets bad enough, people will trade their vote for stability.
It's a chilling thought. We look at the Roman Empire as ancient history, something you study in textbooks. But this source suggests it's not dead, it's just dormant. It's an operating system waiting for the right hardware, the blockchain, the AI, and the right crisis to boot up again.
And as the source puts it, the sun setting on that 2056 Mediterranean, illuminating those solar panels and marble facades, it's a warning. History doesn't end, it just changes costume.
And on that note, we're going to leave you to mull that over. If the blockchain republic offers a functioning life and current democracy offers gridlock, would you sign the contract? Would you take the oath?
Keep questioning the trends.
See you next time.